Hey, what's up everybody? This is Burke, aka Dansg08, and this video is going to be dedicated to me talking about the Metal Gear Solid games and what I love about them. And I'm going to try to kind of rank them in my own head, because it's always something that I've kind of questioned in my own mind. As in, out of all the Metal Gear Solid games, how would I rank them? And this is something that I decided to just sit down and write a few kind of points on while I was at work one day, because I spent a lot of time on this channel giving love to Final Fantasy X and making lots of in-depth videos about it, you know, not just the regular kind of walkthrough and movie and that kind of stuff, but actually making some serious kind of content related stuff. I mean, this isn't going to be an in-depth analysis or review of these games, it's just going to be me kind of talking about what I love about each Metal Gear game and try to put them into some kind of order for myself. I mean, they don't have to be put into an order. I think on the whole, the Metal Gear Solid series is probably the most solid franchise of all time. I mean, in terms of consistency, I mean, straight off the bat I can say that there is not one Metal Gear Solid game which I think was bad, and there's not too many series that have that level of you know, quality throughout from start to finish. So yeah, this is just something that I came up with while I was at work, and I wanted to sit down and just discuss my experiences in with Metal Gear Solid, what I loved about them, and I want to hear from you guys as well, because now that we've got Metal Gear Solid 5, I've completed that game as well. I've done everything there is to do for that game, apart from the repetitive side missions and, you know, grinding to get 100%, etc., which I don't really care about. But I wanted to see what you guys think as well, because it's a very subjective thing, because the Metal Gears are so different. Everyone has their own opinion on which ones are the best and why they love them, and I wanted to see what you guys thought as well in the comments. So I'll probably start it off with the Metal Gear that I like the least, and the Metal Gear I like the least out of all the ones that have come out. Again, when I say Metal Gear, I mean Metal Gear Solid. I'm not including Rising, I'm not including Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2, and I'm also not including the Portable Ops games as well in this list. So these are just the games that are Metal Gear Solid that have been playable on, like, you know, PS3, PS4, PS1, etc. So the one I like the least is Peace Walker. If you've played, if you've watched my Metal Gear Solid walkthroughs, you would probably have guessed that was the answer, because I've already mentioned it, especially Metal Gear Solid 5. Peace Walker, it originally came out on PSP anyway, and I have this thing about, at the time, you know, I thought if a Metal Gear Solid is coming out on PSP, there must be a reason for it. It must be aimed at a different kind of audience, you know, it must be a different kind of game, and I was very kind of judgmental towards it before I even ever played it. Because for me, Metal Gear Solid, it was such a cinematic gaming experience that I thought if they're deciding to not make it available on a big screen, there must be a reason for it. It must, you know, the mechanics must be different, the aim of the game must be different, you know, the direction of the game would be different. So I stayed away from Peace Walker, and I never actually played it on the PSP, because I always held out that, you know, one day it would come to the big screen, and they didn't disappoint, because they included it in the HD collection along with Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3. So I played it for the first time in the HD collection, and, you know, straight off the bat, it was not a bad game, you know. And some people really, really love Peace Walker. I've definitely, you know, seen comments around YouTube on particular videos where people have said that, some of them even said that it's their favourite Metal Gear game. And, you know, fair play to you guys. These are the kind of opinions that I want to hear about in the comments. You know, if Peace Walker was a game that you absolutely loved, I'd love to know why. Because for me, it didn't really do it for me. Things I remember off the top of my head, because I've only ever played through it once, was the boss battles. I found underwhelming in that game, because it was always mech based as far as I remember. There weren't any, like, physical human enemies to fight against, they were always mechanical. You know, this tank here and this AI pod there and all this kind of stuff. It was okay the first, you know, couple of times, but it wasn't that engaging, I don't think. Characters wise, it wasn't really as appealing to me as the other games for some reason. You know, Kaz was the first one that, you know, it was the first time he was really introduced into a game. Kaz is a good character, but in that game he was like the main kind of supporting role alongside Snake, and, you know, I find Kaz to be a good character because I find him to be quite real. I mean, not every character has to have these amazing, memorable quirks and, you know, crazy backstories or anything like that. But Kaz is a kind of supporting character. He's not Metal Gear enough for me, if that makes any sense, because, you know, almost every character in Metal Gear has something about them, and Kaz is probably the most normal guy out of all of them. And, you know, because he was one of the main kind of faces of Peace Walker, I think he worked better in in Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain, but not so well in Peace Walker, if you ask me. And it was pretty much only him. I mean, he was the only guy that we would talk to most of the time. So yeah, I didn't enjoy that aspect of it too much. Gameplay wise, obviously, again, originally it was made for the PSP, so you know, certain things had to be done, you know, in terms of gameplay mechanics and all that kind of stuff to compensate for the fact that you're playing on a PSP, and it wasn't something that I enjoyed quite as much. And I think with Peace Walker, it's just I could never get over that initial kind of judgment I had at the fact that they made it specifically for the PSP on launch. So I always had a negative bias towards it. So I think it's one of those games I definitely need to come back to play again, because I feel like, put it this way, I got to the first ending, and apparently after the first ending there's an extra chapter that's available where you have to replay previous missions, I think, in order to get the parts to build Metal Gear Zeke, and after that you get another ending. And to be honest, I'd had enough of the game by then, and I never bothered carrying on because I just wasn't enjoying it. Even, you know, David Hayter's voice acting was not that good in Peace Walker, and I love David Hayter. I've said this before in my other playthroughs of the game, but David Hayter, I think it was his worst performance vocally as well. You know, just in general, Peace Walker just never did it for me. Even the story and that kind of stuff was just, for me, it just didn't stack up to the other Metal Gears, and for that reason I would rank it as the Metal Gear that I enjoyed the least. But it's also the Metal Gear that I'm kind of least knowledgeable about, and it's probably the one that I'm being least fair to, just because I haven't given it as much time and dedication as the other Metal Gears. So, you know, it ranks bottom of the list, but that's not purely because of the game's fault. It's partly my fault as well. So I'm willing to admit that for Peace Walker. And now that I've played Metal Gear Solid 5 to the end, I do want to go back to Peace Walker one more time and give it another try, because maybe I underappreciated that game when I first played through it. So yeah, Peace Walker was the one that I would say that I enjoyed the least. Now is a more controversial decision, because I would probably, for me, the next one is a toss-up between Metal Gear Solid 4, which is not a surprise to most people, but Metal Gear Solid 5. Now, this is difficult, because if I was to put Metal Gear Solid 4 above Metal Gear Solid 5, I think probably 99% of people would disagree with me, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with people disagreeing with me, but because I'm still so fresh out of Metal Gear Solid 5, again, maybe that's something that will grow on me with time. Let's say I did put Metal Gear Solid 5 below Metal Gear Solid 4. I'll try my best to explain why I think Metal Gear Solid 4 deserves a little more credit than I think it ended up getting. So with Metal Gear Solid 5, this was probably the game that I went most in depth on in terms of my final thoughts. I dedicated an entire final episode to it, so I'll try not to repeat myself too much. I'll just make a few general comments about it. Gameplay wise, I think it was definitely one of the strongest Metal Gears of all time. You know, the gameplay, the open world that they created, okay, there was a lot of kind of empty areas of it, and some of the outposts especially were kind of very similar to each other. But in terms of the general gameplay, the feel that game had, you know, the fluidity in battle, the stealth elements, you know, all that kind of stuff, the customizability, the depth of the combat, the way the CQC worked, the buddy system that you had, you know, the buddies with all different abilities, and the way you could order them around, etc. I think it was innovative in a lot of ways, and gameplay wise I have absolutely no complaints, and it's likely that if I was to rank this on gameplay alone, it would probably be either first or second. But as you guys all know, for me, Metal Gear is more than just gameplay. For me, Metal Gear is, you know, it's the story, it's the saga, it's the adventure, it's the tactical espionage action, you know. So it's something that I was invested in very early, ever since the first Metal Gear I played. I just love the characters, I love the story, I love the world, and whenever I play a new Metal Gear game, it was always, my first priority was finding out what is going to happen in the story. You know, what is Snake going to be up to, what are we going to be doing, you know, what's going to be the next bombshell, you know. And Metal Gear Solid 5 was one that kind of disappointed me a bit in this regard. It didn't have the same Metal Gear vibe that I got in the other games. I think even Peace Walker had a little bit more of that Metal Gear Solid soul than the Metal Gear Solid 5. What do I mean by this? This contains spoilers, obviously. I'll probably put that in the description anyway, but this contains spoilers for pretty much all the Metal Gear games. For Metal Gear Solid 5, we play as a Phantom of Big Boss, which, you know, as a plot device is fairly ingenious, and maybe if you're an outside person watching it, so if I was to make a movie version of Metal Gear Solid 5, it would work a lot better, because you'd be a passive observer of this Venom Snake. But you spend the entire game having to play as Venom Snake, and something seems off about the guy from the start. I mean, okay, he's been in a coma for 9 years, but he just seems so flat compared to the Big Boss that we know and love. You know, Big Boss, he has this awesome charisma, he has, you know, funny one-liners, you know, he has an energy about him, he has an aura about him. And this guy, you know that there's just something off about him. He doesn't feel like the real Big Boss. And at the end of the day, you have to spend the best part of at least a good 40 to 50 hours playing as this guy and going through a story with him. And, you know, when you realize the twist at the end that he is a Phantom of Big Boss, you know, you appreciate it from a story perspective, because it was executed quite well, and it's something that's difficult to pull off, and it's a very kind of, you know, out of left field kind of plan to create a body double of Big Boss, while the real Big Boss, you know, goes after his own agenda. But you end up feeling shortchanged, because, you know, we love Big Boss. You know, anyone who's played the Metal Gear series, we all love Big Boss, and, you know, he's we put him on such a pedestal, and the fact that we've only had to play as this Phantom of him, it's you feel a little bit robbed of the experience, if you ask me. And I couldn't help but think, you know, wonderful idea for the plot, you know, even though even that's a little bit dubious, but I think it was a very good idea to have a twist like this. But surely I just think they could have done it another way. They could have done it in such a way that this guy still wasn't the real Big Boss, maybe, but he still retained that energy, that life, that soul that Big Boss had as well in some way. But it was something that didn't come, so I was a little bit disappointed at the fact that we had to play as Venom Snake. And again, that's subjective. I mean, pretty much everything I say here is subjective, and that's why I would never ever call this any kind of review or analysis or anything like that. It's just my own feelings. But that was one thing. The other characters we got in the story, I mean, Ocelot is a shadow of what he is in the other games. He lacks character, he lacks interesting dialogue. All he does is just spew out endless encyclopedic information. He knows everything about everything, and we never got an indication that he was this knowledgeable about everything in the other games. I mean, he was just, you know, a guy who was, you know, he was obviously highly intelligent, but he didn't seem to have an encyclopedic knowledge of pretty much everything.
During World War II, the U.S. military used the languages of different tribes, including the Navajo, as codes, right? I know the term code talker was used to mean people sent to the battlefield to speak in those codes. Yeah, they're both Ibero-Romance languages. Born in Hungary, more specifically northern Transylvania, after it reverted to Hungary from Romania. Your thoughts formed a synchronicity with the boy's psyche and were amplified inside his brain. Human neural synapses transmit weak electrical currents between neurons. These electrical currents, though at a level difficult to observe, warp the magnetic field outside the body. The third boy is able to pick up these weak fluctuations. Contrary to psychotronics, which involves controlling the human mind, his abilities as a receptor are too high. Cytoplasmic incompatibility, killing the males, and parthenogenesis. Parthenogenesis? Aphids. Aphids use that to reproduce via females only.
I mean, Ocelot, when I say, if I was to say to someone, do an impression of Ocelot, the first thing you guys would do is do the hand movements, you know, say you're pretty good and all this kind of stuff. And it seemed like he was almost too scared to fall back on those things that we know and love. But at the end of the day, this is Ocelot. You know, you spent Metal Gear Solid 3 establishing him as a young man and as a character, and he's just, you know, metamorphosized into this dull person. You know, there's no menace. I mean, even in Metal Gear Solid 3, as a younger man, you could still see he had some sadistic tendencies. You know, his crazy games with the revolver. The way he just watches the snake torture scene and that kind of stuff. He was manic. You know, he was a really interesting character on multiple levels. And here, in Metal Gear Solid 5, he just didn't have it, and I was so disappointed by that, because I was really happy to know that Ocelot was in this game in such a big way. And he was being voice acted by Troy Baker, who obviously, you know, we all know is a master at his craft. And I was just, you know, really hyped about seeing Ocelot again. And outside of the one cutscene where, you know, he told people about the fact that engraving your gun gives you no tactical advantage, just the same way Big Boss told him 20 years ago. That scene was great, but that was one little drop in an ocean of monotoneness. So yeah, I mean, it just, for me, it was that outside of the kind of more objective things like the fact that the game wasn't complete, which we all know, the missing content, everything, that's already taken away points. But even the stuff from the stuff that we did get, I was just disappointed by some of those kind of things. And I don't feel like there's another Metal Gear in which I could make the same criticisms for. Every other Metal Gear had that to some extent. So, Metal Gear Solid 5 disappointed me in that way. And obviously, you can't talk about Metal Gear Solid 5 without the incompleteness. The fact that they had to pad out the second chapter so much, they gave us 12 or 13 repeat missions with no real reason behind them. It was a disappointment in that sense. And I said it in my final thoughts. For me, Metal Gear Solid 5, if it was to be completed the way Kojima wanted it to, the way Kojima envisioned it, if he had the finances and the time to complete it, I reckon for most of us, we would have been saying that this was the best Metal Gear of all time. But because he didn't get that, the product that we ended up getting, I feel like we got shortchanged. And yes, of course, you can make the whole joke about, Kojima wanted us to feel the phantom pain ourselves of having an incomplete game, like the way Venom Snake's missing an arm. But that's not good enough. At the end of the day, we have an incomplete game that, for me, on those levels especially, didn't quite do it. I could go into more detail, but for me, along with the incompleteness, it was just the feel. There was just something lacking in this game. I think it got a bit too corporate, a bit too big. I think he was aiming for a lot more of a wider audience with this one, because he knew he needed to make a lot of money back. So he cut back on the cutscenes, I think, too much. And cutscenes is something we'll talk about in Metal Gear Solid 4 anyway. But it got a little bit out of hand, I think, towards the end. So he had to make a lot of concessions, which ended up hurting the final product, especially for us Metal Gear fans. And I'm a little bit annoyed at the fact that the reviews for this game were so blown out of proportion. I think that caused me to have, just almost in protest to those reviews, I wanted to criticize this game to its fullest extent, because the reviews just didn't go there for most of them. I mean, I reckon anyone who calls themselves a Metal Gear fan, who plays through this game from start to finish, and then sits down and has a good old think about it, or maybe even plays some of the other games, I don't think they'd be able to sit down and give this game a 10 out of 10. I really don't. And so many reviewers big reviewers gave this game a 10 out of 10. It was just ridiculous. And that annoyed me, because it was built up in such a big way. There were a crazy amount of trailers, endless gameplay, all this kind of stuff. Even the fact that some of the stuff in the trailers wasn't in the game, all this kind of stuff. It was a massive hype machine that I stayed away from. Thankfully, I didn't get myself too hooked into the hype. But at the end of the day, it's a game that was worked on for so many years, and it has Kojima at the helm. It's likely to be his last true Metal Gear Solid game. I was expecting the big masterpiece, and it's just a shame that because of certain, business-related things, I think we were robbed of that. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on Metal Gear Solid 5. But again, overall, when you look at everything, it was still a good game, and great at times. But for me, when you compare it to the other Metal Gears especially, I think it's, for me personally, it was one of the weaker titles. So, Metal Gear Solid 4. I even had doubts about whether I'd put Metal Gear Solid 2 ahead of Metal Gear Solid 4. And then I changed my mind, and I'm going to kind of explain why a little bit later. But next up is Metal Gear Solid 4, and I personally enjoyed Metal Gear Solid 4, I would probably say more than the average person. For me, Metal Gear Solid 4 was a game that had flaws, obvious flaws, but I still loved it. And I reckon, for me, I tried to be empathetic with Kojima on this one. I tried to see it from Kojima's perspective, and when I did it that way, I came to appreciate the game more, because I really appreciated how difficult Kojima's task was with this game. I mean, the series had been around for almost 20 years now. It had 3 fantastic games already. You know, 3 games that were all critically acclaimed. They're all kind of, you know, the best of their generation. You know, they're in the argument for being the best of their generation. And you want to walk away, but you can't do it. You have to make one more title, and you decide you have to make a title that is going to wrap up the story. Now, you're talking about a story that spans more than 40 years, almost 50 years. You know, contains multiple story threads, multiple characters, it contains clones, you know, all this confusing stuff, all this convoluted stuff. You've got the Patriots, and you have to find a way to bring together all of these threads and end it in a satisfying way. Now, you know, for me, this is very difficult from a storytelling point of view, in terms of the task that Kojima had with Metal Gear Solid 4. You know, he's on a new system as well, the PS3 obviously at the time. He had a mammoth task, and it was going to be almost impossible for him to please everyone, because he needs to please the Metal Gear Solid fans that want that resolution to the story, and he needs to try to please everyone else who just wants a great game to play. So he had an extremely difficult task, I think, with Metal Gear Solid 4, and I think, you know, in most cases, I think he did a really good job with Metal Gear Solid 4. I mean, think of it this way. I think one of the main criticisms of Metal Gear Solid 4 is obviously the super long cutscenes, and that maybe the cutscene to gameplay ratio was too high. You know, I agree. I've got to say, yes, the cutscenes were long. I don't think anyone can really defend the fact that the cutscenes were long. I mean, yes, they were long. But like I said, there's a reason why they were so long. I mean, they had to be. I mean, let's think about the stuff that these cutscenes had to address. I'm not going to talk about the ending cutscene with Big Boss and his reappearance, because that cutscene, that story, takes place after all the gameplay is finished anyway. So it's almost like you've done the game, you're finished. Now sit back and watch this like 60-minute, 90-minute movie in which Big Boss reveals all. I mean, that doesn't really count for me, because you're already done with the gameplay. It's not interrupting anything per se. So forget the ending cutscene. But you know, if you think about the amount of story that needs to be told, you know, the characters that need to be developed. I mean, you've got people that are being introduced after a very long time. I mean, people haven't seen Dr. Naomi Hunter since Metal Gear Solid 1. They haven't seen Meryl since Metal Gear Solid 1. So all of these people, you know, what were they doing? Why have they returned? What significance do they have in the story? Colonel Campbell, you know, he was an AI in Metal Gear Solid 2. He wasn't even real. So, you know, all of these guys are coming back. You've got Raiden returning as the cyborg ninja. I mean, think about Raiden in Metal Gear Solid 2. He comes back as this badass ninja in Metal Gear Solid 4. You need to understand why that's happened. You know, you need a little bit of that as well, even though they don't give you the full kind of backstory on it. You know, you have a major character who's making a return. You need to make sense of that as well. You've got Snake, who now looks like a 60, 70-year-old, even though he should only be in his 40s. What the fuck's going on? You need to explain that whole story. You know, Eva's returned. Eva's like 75, 80. She has to explain to us about the Patriots, you know, Big Boss and Zero, their whole conflict. Why has it come to this? You know, basically she has to explain the entire story in a cohesive way. And you know, what are we fighting for? The Patriots, and what does Liquid want? What do we want? You know, how are we going to rid the world of the Patriots? What difference is that going to make? Meryl's returned. You know, why is she still there on the battlefield? What does she feel for Snake? All this kind of stuff. I mean, I could go on all day about the story that needs to be explained in Metal Gear Solid 4. It was just such a wide and deep story that needed to all be connected up in a meaningful way, that, you know, the game could have been twice as long, and there still would have been stuff that they could have talked about. So, you know, when I see it from that perspective, and I think of the task that Kojima had in terms of telling the story, I think he did a pretty good job. I mean, I can't say that he did a bad job. Yes, the cutscenes were very long, but I feel like they had to be. Could they have been shorter? Probably. I don't know. He could have made it 20% shorter, I don't know, or integrated it slightly better into the gameplay in some way, I don't know. But in terms of what I got from the cutscenes looking back at the game, they explained a hell of a lot of things in those cutscenes, and they told a lot of story. And I mean, for me, when I try to look back on a Metal Gear and think how much did I love that game, I try to think of, you know, memorable moments and, you know, stuff that stays with me once I'm done with the game. And the cutscenes that we did get, I mean, think of how well made they were. They looked absolutely fantastic on PS3, and I reckon it took a long time for games to catch up to the visual fidelity that the Metal Gear Solid 4 had. I mean, it was only released in what, 2008, so the PS3 was still relatively fresh, and it looked absolutely fantastic. Even though it was 720p, that game has stood the test of time well, and the cutscenes were so well done. I mean, try to remember the fight between Raiden and Vamp with all the geckos. I mean, how fantastically choreographed was that scene? I'm pretty sure that everyone who's played through Metal Gear Solid 4 will remember that cutscene and how it played out. And for me, it just, the game had its fair share of great moments, I think. I was really satisfied with the ending, and I'm not even talking about the big boss ending. I mean, I think the stuff with Snake, you know, having to you know, go off and spend his last days alone, that the wedding scene that we have at the end with all of our, you know, favorite characters all there, the way Otacon and Sunny are, the way Otacon has to, you know, explain to Sunny that, you know, Snake is gonna have to kind of leave them. And I mean, who can forget Otacon saying Snake had a hard life? You know, that for me, those were the really kind of special moments in Metal Gear. It was really wonderful. I mean, think about the return to Shadow Moses.
What's a Russian gunship doing here?
Wow, he must be crazy to fly Hind in this kind of weather.
Who's that?
Nice to meet you, Snake. It's an honor to speak to a living legend like yourself.
I mean, think about how you felt when you first walked into Shadow Moses at the start of Act 4. I mean, all of these are such memorable moments, and I think this game had more of those memorable moments than Metal Gear Solid 5 did. And for that alone, for me personally, it deserves more, you know, a bigger place in my heart because of that. And some of that stuff gets lost in the flood of cutscenes and convoluted story and exposition. I can understand that, but I think if you give the game enough time, maybe play through it more than once, there really are some wonderful moments in Metal Gear Solid 4. And I don't know, there were some definitely very powerful things here for me. They rounded off the story well, because I mean the structure I think was pretty good. I mean, the chapter structure worked a lot better than it did in Metal Gear Solid 5. We've got clearly defined chapters. Geographically, we moved from one place to another. There was a lot of nice variety within the game. You know, Liquid was a clear, well-defined antagonist, and who can forget that epic fight between Snake and Liquid on top of Arsenal Gear, or GW, or whatever the hell it was. I forget what it's called, Outer Heaven, that ship. I mean, that was an epic fist fight between two old men. I mean, seriously, that was fantastic. They rounded off everyone's story in a nice enough way. I mean, everyone got their ending. You know, some were happier than others. Snake, you know, at the end of the day, at least he's alive, and it kind of leaves you with the fact that, you know, he's done. At least, you know, his time on the battlefield is over. He's done everything he needs to do. He's saved the world from the grip of the Patriots, and although, you know, he's got this unfortunate condition in which he's going to have to, you know, he's going to have to die at a young age, at least you know that he's achieved his goal in life, and he's going to fall a victim to his genes, but not without having his say first, you know. So I think that was a powerful ending. I mean, think about Raiden. You know, Raiden makes his epic return as a cyborg ninja, and the whole, you know, even when you see Naomi Hunter with him, is reminiscent of you know, what she was feeling because of Grey Fox in Metal Gear Solid 1, who was a cyborg ninja and her older brother, well, kind of not biological brother, but still. I mean, Naomi Hunter's story was very interesting, you know, the twists and turns along the way. Everything, you know, her and Otacon, their moments were kind of interesting. I love Sunny.
We grown-ups have to watch our caloric intake, you know. Ah, but thank you. I was looking for this.
You're not watching your nicotine intake.
Sonny.
She was a wonderful relief throughout the game to have, you know, Olga's daughter there. I mean, I think that was a great decision to put her in there. And the fact that Raiden rescued her from the Patriots, they fit so much into this game, it's unreal. You really have to kind of sit back and think and kind of replay it and read about it to really appreciate just how much stuff they put into this game. And it was at the detriment of the cutscenes being too long. But for me personally, as a lover of the story, it was wonderful to have this amount of detail. And they fit it all in a fairly nice way. There wasn't too much, crazy, contrived bullshit. I mean, it's all within the realms of what we've seen in Metal Gear beforehand. We're all pretty used to that stuff. And to top it all off, it contains, for me, the most orgasmic moment in Metal Gear history, which is the return of Big Boss. I mean, I will never ever forget how I felt when we were rolling through the credits and I saw the credits end at Big Boss and it said Richard Doyle. And I was thinking, what the fuck, we haven't seen Big Boss. And I don't know who Richard Doyle is. I mean, I'm not really good with my voice actors or whatever. So I'm like, who the hell is Richard Doyle? And I was kind of just shocked. I was kind of just frozen. And then I see Big Boss's return and my jaw dropped. And, my first thought was, oh, seriously, fuck off, Metal Gear. I'm going to shut the console. This is the biggest, most stupidest shit I've ever seen. And then you kind of sit down and he explains everything. You see Zero. And then you see his final moments with Snake, and it's so good. I mean, even talking about it now, I've given myself goosebumps. That scene for me, and that moment is like the most unforgettable moment of Metal Gear of all time. And people will still think maybe it's silly, it's too long. They still won't agree with the fact that, oh, come on, how can Big Boss return, etc., whatever. But for me, that Big Boss moment is for me it's at the top of the list in terms of greatest Metal Gear moments, in terms of how it made me feel, because I'd invested so much into that game in terms of story anyway. I was taking the game nice and slowly to make sure I tried to get everything I could, and I was already exhausted from playing it for so long, and to be hit with something like that right at the end of the game after everything's done was a super special moment for me. So yeah, Metal Gear Solid 4, despite its flaws, which most of you guys already know about, you've probably all played the game, I'm not going to go into, but I just wanted to share with you why I loved certain aspects of Metal Gear Solid 4. So yeah, and why in some ways for me it was better than Metal Gear Solid 5. And again, I mean, final comment on Metal Gear Solid 4, it's still, despite all of this story that it had to tell and all of these characters it had to introduce, it still found room for some of that Metal Gear goofiness and that humour that we all love from the first 3 games. I mean, think about it. You've got Johnny, who, you're out in the battlefield, guns are firing everywhere, bombs are going off, people are dying left, right and centre, and then you find this random guy who's taking a shit in a barrel, and it's just hilarious, and you're just like, they took the time to think about this. You've got a soldier who's peeing, off the edge of a little bridge into the river. They took the time to put that guy in there, so you could go up to him and, interrogate him or CQC him or shoot him while he's taking a piss. It's vintage Metal Gear, and the fact that they still found time to do stuff like that, I really love them for it. Even Drebin. For me, a lot of people, yes, Drebin, in terms of the story, is a pointless character to some extent, but I love Drebin. He was funny, he was different. He had a smoking monkey. The monkey was addicted to cigarettes, and they burp together when they're drinking Coke, soda, or whatever they're drinking. It's brilliant. I mean, there's always the fact that they found room to put some of this stuff in there. I always appreciate that kind of stuff, because despite everything that's going on, there's always room to crack a smile or have a laugh about something, and that's what I've always loved about Metal Gear. There's always times when they kind of stop taking themselves so seriously for a moment and introduce something that's a lot more human and real. So, and again, Metal Gear Solid 5 for me was much more lacking in this regard. Okay, so let's get to the Metal Gear Solids that everyone knows and loves. I will start with Metal Gear Solid 2. I believe Metal Gear Solid 3 and Metal Gear Solid 1 to be better than Metal Gear Solid 2, in my own opinion. I won't say better, I will say I enjoyed them more than Metal Gear Solid 2. For me, Metal Gear Solid 2... Metal Gear Solid 2 is a tough one. It was... I'm pretty sure it was the first Metal Gear that I played. I think I may have played a demo of Metal Gear Solid 1, but I was probably like 8 or something, and I was just like, this is cool, but I don't really understand it. What are we doing here? Who is this guy? Why am I calling for an event? It didn't make any sense to me, so I don't think I really understood any of it. Metal Gear Solid 2, I was like 12 maybe when I first played it, and I don't think that's a good age to be playing Metal Gear Solid 2. I think even when you're 22, you can have a tough time understanding that game. I think first time through, I don't think there's a person on this planet that fully understood Metal Gear Solid 2 the first time they played it. But, you know, and that's still, for me, the biggest issue that I had with the game. But Metal Gear Solid 2, the first time I got my hands on that was when I first got my PS2 in 2001. Every now and again I would get the PlayStation 2 magazine, especially if they had demos in there. And I remember finding a magazine that had a Metal Gear Solid 2 tanker demo in there. And I played the shit out of that demo. I absolutely loved it. I mean, I think, you know, I must have played through that tanker mission so many times. And, you know, the fact that they fit so much into a demo, and, you know, I love the gameplay and all that kind of stuff. For me, it was a revelation because I'd never really played a game like that before. So that was the first time I really got introduced to Metal Gear Solid 2. And the tanker was a much simpler deal in terms of story, so you kind of understood what was going on, even if you were like 12 years old. So really loved the tanker. And I would say that, you know, even before Final Fantasy X, it was my first, you know, cinematic gaming experience, and it was the first time that I was playing stuff outside of racing games and Crash Bandicoot and FIFA and all this kind of stuff. You know, it was the first time I played something that had a bit of story to it, a little bit of substance in that regard. So it will always, you know, it will always be the game that introduced me to cinematic gaming. So for that reason, it always has a special place in my heart as well. Now, for me, Metal Gear Solid 2, love the tanker mission, love it to bits. I loved the big shell for some reason, even though it was a similar environment. I mean, when you think of like Metal Gear Solid 4 that spans across continents, for some reason I love the big shell, and I feel like they implemented it in a good enough way that it still had variety to it. They used the space really well in that game, and I think the bomb defusal comes to mind, where we had to disable the C4s. I mean, that was memorable stuff, and I really enjoyed that as well. So the location and the gameplay of Metal Gear Solid 2, especially since it was the first Metal Gear that I really played, I remember really enjoying it. It was a total revelation to me, this whole stealth thing, you know, being able to go into cardboard boxes and whatnot. I mean, this is stuff that most people would have felt with Metal Gear Solid 1 because they probably would have played that first. But because with me, I was introduced with Metal Gear Solid 2, then for me, that's the game that first introduced me to these kind of stealth concepts that I'd never seen before. I mean, in hindsight, when you look at it, it retained a lot of the goodness that was in Metal Gear Solid 1 and added, you know, some nice depth as well. And there's a very good reason why it didn't deviate too much from Metal Gear Solid 1, and that's because the entire thing was a reconstruction of Metal Gear Solid 1. And for me, Metal Gear Solid 2, obviously the whole point of that game is Kojima's kind of messing with your mind in that game. I mean, it's one of the biggest mindfuck games of its time, and maybe of all time. I mean, you spend the entire game playing as Raiden. You're unhappy about it, you know, as a Metal Gear fan. You've played the tanker mission as Solid Snake. If you played Metal Gear Solid 1, you played Metal Gear Solid 1 as Solid Snake. You love Solid Snake. He's the man. He's so cool. We love being him. And then suddenly you're this, like, you know, effeminate blonde guy who's a total rookie, you know, has no experience in the field and all that kind of stuff, and you just, you know, you're not happy about that. But then, you know, the game progresses and you get near the end and things start to get really weird. Once you make it into Arsenal gear, you know, the codec starts spazzing out and you realize that things aren't as they seem. And the way that kind of creeps up on you, and the creepiness that I felt in those moments, you know, when the Colonel's spazzing out on the radio, I felt really uneasy, you know, when he tells you to turn the console off, and, you know, you get the random little mini video in the right corner of the Japanese woman, and you're like, is this going to turn into a jump scare or something? I mean, the kind of weirdness that I felt during those moments in Metal Gear Solid 2, those were pretty special. But the entire purpose of it was to you know, for Kojima to not bow down to the pressure of having made Metal Gear Solid 1. You know, it's his way of saying, you know, F you to all of the, you know, all of the hype and all of the speculation surrounding, you know, the eventual release of Metal Gear 2. I mean, he kept Raiden a secret all the way until the release, which is impressive by those standards. So why do I not like Metal Gear Solid 2 as much as Metal Gear Solid 1? Well, for me the main reason is because, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a repeat of Metal Gear Solid 1, right? It's by design. He's done it on purpose because it's meant to be a Solid Snake simulator, and, you know, it's trying to show that anyone can be made into a Solid Snake with the right kind of training. But again, it's much like Metal Gear Solid 5. You get hit with a punch at the end that nothing you've seen has been real. And, you know, for me, that's always a double-edged sword. You know, in terms of a storytelling device, it's always a nice thing, but in terms of gameplay, I mean, it's going to sound a lot like what I said for Metal Gear Solid 5. But once I didn't understand the twist anyway when I first played it. You know, I got the idea that the Colonel was an AI and that this wasn't real, but I was like, huh, you know, Solid Snake Simulator, what? You know, it alienated a lot of players because of how convoluted it was. I mean, some of the exposition in that game and the ideas that they were trying to present in that game were just so deep and so ahead of most of the levels of the people who were playing it, myself included. I mean, even now, I mean, figuring out the intricacies of that game, it took a long time even after the game was released, and it wasn't really designed for the mind of a developing person, to be honest. You had to have been really paying attention to the story and have a you know, decent understanding of the topics involved to really appreciate what Kojima was trying to do. And, you know, I will admit that it was a genius move by Kojima to do this, but for me personally, was it the most entertaining game to play? Was it the best choice in terms of a video game? For me it wasn't. You know, because at the end of the day, yeah, you can say that, look, I'm trying to portray this message, etc., etc., but making the player realize that they've been playing something that isn't real and something that's just a replica of a previous very successful game, it slightly cheapens the experience a little bit, and I guess it depends entirely on how you feel about the twist in the story. I mean, if the twist is powerful enough and you think the message is strong enough to warrant this, then that's fine, and there's a good reason why it's probably the best reviewed, or at least one of the best reviewed Metal Gear Solids of all time, because it did something that very few games had ever done before. So I can always respect what Kojima did, but from a totally personal level, in terms of how I felt when playing it, it just didn't do it for me, because at the end of the day, for example, an example is the bosses in the game, you know, the bad guys of the game, they're supposed to be replicas of Metal Gear Solid 1. Of course, you know, they had slightly different abilities. So Fat Man was meant to be the kind of Vulcan Raven style battle, and you've got the containers, which is similar to what you had to do there. But when you realize that, again, much like Metal Gear Solid 5, they're just shadows of who we had in Metal Gear Solid 1. So I feel like it's kind of a double thing here. On the one hand, he's not bowing down to people's expectations of him in Metal Gear Solid 1, because people were expecting him to just make the same game again. Yeah, okay, he's kind of answered his critics by shocking them this way and giving them something, you know, very different with a massive twist like this. But when you think about it, he's still basically recreated the first game. So it's a really kind of indirect, roundabout way of still being able to use the strengths of the first game. Because he might have been thinking to himself, okay, I don't want to make the same game twice, but I know I did such a good job with Metal Gear Solid 1, I still need to find a way to make it enough like Metal Gear Solid 1 that I know it's going to be a great game in that sense. What would be a good way to do this? I know, let's make the second game a simulation of the first. So we still retain all of the good stuff that we used in the first game, but then I also get to hit them with this genius twist that it's all a dream, or well, dream. It's VR, you know. So it's Kojima being super smart once again, but for me, again, it drew away from the experience slightly. But at the end of the day, it's my third favorite Metal Gear Solid of all time, and I still absolutely love the game to bits. Don't get me wrong, I love Metal Gear Solid 2. but I'm just ranking it against the experiences of playing the other games. So when I compare it to Metal Gear Solid 1 and Metal Gear Solid 3, the feeling that those games gave me were stronger than what I got from Metal Gear Solid 2. Okay, so it's going to sound like at the end of all of this that I spent a lot of time praising Metal Gear Solid 4 and a lot of time criticizing Metal Gear Solid 2. Why is Metal Gear Solid better than 4? For me, it's more because Metal Gear Solid 4 was more conventionally disliked, and Metal Gear Solid 2 is seen as such a pinnacle of Metal Gear Solid in general. I'm pretty sure it's the best reviewed, or at least joint best reviewed Metal Gear Solid of them all. So that's why I kind of focused more on the strengths of Metal Gear Solid 4 and the weaknesses of Metal Gear Solid 2, because Metal Gear Solid 2, as we all know in general, is a fantastic game, but like I said before, I mean, some of the ideas behind it and the whole premise behind creating this game was something that the more I thought about it, the less I kind of liked that idea of it. And I think a lot of what I'm saying here will always depend on which game you played first and in which order you played them and at what age you played them. Now, these are all very important factors when you're ranking your Metal Gear Solid games. So let's say that, you know, I was 10 years older when I first played Metal Gear. Metal Gear Solid 1 was my first game that I played at age 18. I played Metal Gear Solid 2 at age 21, etc, etc. Then maybe my whole perspective on these Metal Gear Solid games would have been totally different. I could have, you know, respected and understood the weight of the twist and, you know, what it meant a lot better if I was more mature when playing it the first time. I would say the first 2 or 3 times I played Metal Gear Solid 2, I mean, yes, okay, I got the idea that this was a simulation, but I never really was able to put any kind of real deep thought into it. You know, the way, you know, Kojima is trying to say that, you know, you're Solid Snake fans, you think you're a badass, all this stuff, and he puts you in the shoes of Raiden, and you're like, well, you think you're Solid Snake, but in reality you're just a kid who plays video games. This is who you really are. You're just a guy who's done some VR in the form of Metal Gear Solid, and, you know, you're really just a rookie. And, you know, the first boss battle you have with Fortune, you can't touch her. And I think the grand message of Metal Gear Solid 2 is just so wide and far-reaching and hard-hitting and bold that it deserves nothing but respect. But like I said, you know, because of the way that I had to experience all of this and the fact that I'm only coming to realize this stuff just now, well, when I say just now, I mean in much more recent times. I mean, you have to go and, if you're still not up to date with Metal Gear Solid 2, even sometimes reading it is not really enough. You have to go into YouTube and find videos of people who have put in time and dedication to really deciphering Metal Gear Solid 2 and the message it was trying to convey, and only then do you really get it. So the reason why it's still above Metal Gear Solid 4 is, with all things considered, what Kojima has tried to do and what he ended up achieving with Metal Gear Solid 2 is just so impressive that, for me, out of all the Metal Gear Solid games, it's probably aged the best and the one that's probably gained more respect for me as time has gone on, because every time I read a little bit more about Metal Gear Solid 2 or I watch something about it, I understand something that I didn't previously get before. So for that reason, I put it above Metal Gear Solid 4. But again, because this is more about how it makes me feel, the enjoyment I got out of playing it, because the first few times I played it and I was so late to catch on to it, and even after I did catch on, it made me question the entire experience and the motivations behind it, I would still consider Metal Gear Solid 1 and Metal Gear Solid 3 on a personal level to give me the greater enjoyment, and overall, with all things considered, not just how much genius went into making them, I would still place those two games above them. So let's move on. Most of you guys already know what's coming next, because I've said it many times that Metal Gear Solid 3 is my favourite. So by default that makes Metal Gear Solid 1 my second favourite. So going back to Metal Gear Solid 1, that game, you know, you have to put things into context, right? Metal Gear Solid 1 was not my first Metal Gear Solid. It was, to be honest, I don't think I really played Metal Gear Solid 1 and appreciated it to its fullest extent until after I played the Twin Snakes. Now you're going to say that's silly because the Twin Snakes sucks compared to the original, right? Now, in terms of, you know, the original, I'd already played that once or twice, but I was much younger then. Metal Gear Solid in general, I think, is a little bit like wine. I think it's something that's more appreciated with time and age. And I think the older you get and the more mature you get, the more you're going to come to appreciate Metal Gear games. I think playing a Metal Gear Solid game as a 13, 14-year-old and playing it as like a 23, 24-year-old, it's a whole different ballpark. And if you guys are kind of watching this having played a Metal Gear Solid game when you were much younger and you haven't played it for a long time, I would definitely recommend you to just go back to it and try it again, because you might see it with new eyes. You know, as a grown man or woman, you know, you might see it in a way that you hadn't seen it before in younger days. So Metal Gear Solid 1, I love the location of Metal Gear Solid 1. For me, it just I felt it was so real for some reason. I don't know why. I mean, something about Shadow Moses just feels so kind of. It feels like Metal Gear Solid's home. I feel like that's where Metal Gear Solid belongs. There's something about that location that's special for me, and maybe it's because of the way they reintroduced it so nicely in Metal Gear Solid 4. It might have really deepened the connection I have with Shadow Moses. It might be the case, but I love Shadow Moses. And as I was saying before, you need to put games into context. I mean, you've got a man who's made 2 Metal Gear games before this one, but he's made them on the MSX, and now he's got all of this extra hardware power in his hands in the form of the PS1. You know, you've got voice acting, you've got 3D, all this kind of stuff, and it's an opportunity for his imagination to run wild. I mean, it could have all gone wrong, because for Kojima this was a playground. You know, he could have done anything. You know, and in those days, I think his creative powers were kind of at their highest. You know, he's still relatively fresh, you know, game developer, and he had it all to do. So, you know, the stakes were high. If he'd have fucked up that first Metal Gear, we might not even know who Kojima is today. You know, he might have been a guy who a long time ago made a couple of Metal Gear games that a few people played, and then he made a Metal Gear Solid 1 that just sucked. So the stakes are really high, you know. So when you put it into that context and you think about what that game became, you know, it was pretty much the pinnacle of PlayStation 1 gaming, along with, you know, a few other titles like, I don't know, Final Fantasy 7, etc. But it ended up being one of the most legendary games of all time. So regardless of what I think you have to respect what that game has achieved, and, you know, the context in which the game was created. So in that sense, it's pretty special, I've got to say. So in terms of what was good about Metal Gear Solid 1, the soundtrack had, you know, it introduced so many memorable, you know, tracks that were always kind of reimagined and reused in other ways in later Metal Gear games. It established some of our most favorite themes and most memorable, you know, pieces of music that we know and love from Metal Gear. And, you know, some of those tracks, it just suited the atmosphere so beautifully. You know, the whole Shadow Moses environment that you had, and, you know, even the best is yet to come at the end. You know, after the ending that you get, you know, when the credits are rolling, you really feel it. You know, so I think the OST was definitely one of the strongest points of Metal Gear Solid 1 compared to the others. It really did set a precedent for the rest of the games that followed. I mean, a lot of the things that we know and love from the Metal Gear Solid series, a lot of it was kind of dreamed up and imagined in the first Metal Gear Solid game. So we have that game to thank for a lot of the good stuff that we got later on. In terms of structure, I think this was actually one of the games that got the story to gameplay ratio closest to being right, because it still had, you know, a decent amount of codec calls, especially at the start, and maybe they overdid it a little bit at the beginning, but I think it was a pretty good balance in terms of the amount of we got to play and the amount of story, because I don't hear a lot of people complaining about Metal Gear Solid 1's cutscenes being too long. But for the other games, even for Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3, there's always people that would argue that there's too much exposition in those games. Maybe less for Metal Gear Solid 3, but Metal Gear Solid 2 definitely was susceptible to that. I mean, Metal Gear Solid 4 was a whole other ball game, but Metal Gear Solid 1, I think, definitely got the structure right. Again, you know, how memorable it was. Think about, you know, the characters that were introduced in that game. You've got people like Liquid, who was such a memorable antagonist in that game, Ocelot, Sniper Wolf. I mean, you guys, I would imagine anyone who's played Metal Gear Solid 1 remembers these characters vividly. You know, the way they looked in the game, either, you know, the PS1 version or the Twin Snakes, whichever one you played. You know, the boss battles that you had to have against them. I bet if I asked you, you know, what was the boss battle with Ocelot like, you'd be able to tell me. You'd be able to say to me where it was, you know, what kind of stuff you had to do to defeat him, etc. It was just so memorable. and so well thought out that I mean, it stays in your mind. Grey Fox, you know, the way he was introduced, his lines, he was such a mysterious character that was only around for such a short time. I mean, that I reckon is a testament to the strength of a game like Metal Gear Solid 1. Think about Grey Fox. Think about how relatively little he was in the first Metal Gear Solid game, and the guy became an icon. So, I mean, almost every Metal Gear Solid fan loves Grey Fox, and they piggybacked off him again in Metal Gear Solid 2. So this is what I was talking about with Kojima kind of finding a very smart way to reuse the good stuff from Metal Gear Solid 1. So, you know, you've got Olga, who became Grey Fox in Metal Gear Solid 2. He piggybacked off it again in Metal Gear Solid 4 with the Cyborg Ninja. Raiden, there were certainly moments where he echoed Grey Fox. So, you know, the fact that they were able to create a character like Grey Fox in that game is a great indicator of just how strong that game was in terms of creating kind of, I would say, franchise-defining characters that were only there for such a short time, but were so well loved regardless of that. I think, considering that it was the first attempt at Metal Gear Solid, and one of the kind of earlier games, you know, that was on PS1 that had, you know, solid voice acting and everything, I thought the voice acting was really good. It was much better than Twin Snakes, that's for sure. You know, the David Hayter, I think, was really good as Solid Snake in that.
How did you recognize me in disguise?
I never forget a lady.
So there's something you like about me, huh?
Yeah, you've got a great butt.
Oh, I see. First it's my eyes, now it's my butt. What's next?
You know, for the day, considering that it was made in, what, 1998? So that was really good. Again, the boss battles, there was good variety in them. You know, you had your sniper battles, you had Vulcan Raven, you know, who was a totally different thing. You had Ocelot, who was in an enclosed space. You had the fist fight. You had a tank. You know, the variety of boss battles was good in that game as well.
It's useless. I told you, I can read your every thought. Put your controller on the floor. Put it down as flat as you can. That's good. Now, I will move your controller by the power of my will alone.
Obviously, I'm talking about bosses, but I haven't talked about what is one of the best boss battles of all time, which is Psycho Mantis. I mean, the genius behind creating a character like that and a boss battle like that, I think is a milestone in gaming. I mean, the breaking of the fourth wall during that. I mean, I'm pretty sure that pretty much everybody fell for the whole, you know, no one thought of the idea of changing their controller. I mean, what a genius move, seriously. I mean, that's a defining moment in I think in video game history. If you're kind of teaching a course on gaming development, I'm pretty sure you will talk about that boss battle at least some point in the course. So you had Psycho Mantis as well, which was, you know, one of the pinnacles of Metal Gear Solid in general. So I mean, what more can I say? You're talking about a game that took a lot of risks, you know, tried to do things differently. It was the first game on a system that could, you know, have voice acting and 3D and all this kind of stuff. The stakes were high, you know, and the fact that the game turned out so good and became such a kind of foundation that was used again in Metal Gear Solid 2 was it's an indicator to just how strong that game was. And I'm pretty sure that most Metal Gear fans who play through them all would have Metal Gear Solid 1 either as their favourite or probably in the top 2 or 3, definitely. I don't think there's a person in the world that would say Metal Gear Solid 4 is better than 1, I would say. So yes, Metal Gear Solid 1, absolutely love it to bits. And if you haven't played Metal Gear Solid 1 for whatever reason, I don't know why you're still listening to this video, but in case you haven't, you have to. It's something that you have to do in your life, definitely. So, let's come to the greatest Metal Gear Solid in my eyes.
You're not the boss, are you?
and that is Metal Gear Solid 3. Metal Gear Solid 3. Why is Metal Gear Solid 3 for me the best? Let's start right at the beginning. This game, the trailer cinematic kind of at the beginning, it has a little song in there called Snake Eater. Now I've talked about Snake Eater many times. For me, Snake Eater is the best Metal Gear Solid song of all time.
Someday you go through the rain, and someday you'll feed on a tree frog. It's ordeal, the trial to survive. For the day we see new light, I give my life, not for honor, but for you. In my time.
Again, totally subjective. A lot of people do love Snake Eater, so I'm not on my own here. But in terms of it being the favourite, I think a lot of people disagree, and that's fine. But for me, that song is just so powerful that, put it this way, I had an iPod, my first iPod that I ever had, I had for 7 years, and I used it until it was bruised and battered. I replaced the screen, the battery, you know, all that kind of stuff. And to be honest, it's still alive. I retired it after a while because it'd taken enough abuse over 7 years. And at the end of 7 years, out of the hundreds, maybe thousands of tracks I had on that iPod, Snake Eater was in my top 10 most listened to tracks of all time on that iPod. So I'm sure that should give you an idea of how much I love that song. And even to this day, when I hear Snake Eater, it gives me something that no other Metal Gear Solid song does. Even that first, you know, that "What a Thrill" line, it just gives me goosebumps. It's just such a great vocal performance and such a great song. Yes, she talks about feeding on a tree frog, but that just makes it all the more epic. Seriously, it's just such a great song, and I don't think I've enjoyed any other Metal Gear Solid song as much as that. Put it this way, it made a ladder climb up a mountain an epic moment. I mean, I think a lot of people enjoyed that. I don't think there's many people that would look back on that ladder climb and think that was so annoying. It took so long. I'm talking about the first time through. Maybe, you know, if you're doing multiple playthroughs, then it's different. But I'm pretty sure everyone loved climbing up that ladder the first time because of that track in the background. It gave it this whole other dimension. So from the get-go, Snake Eater is just the best. So after Metal Gear Solid 1 and Metal Gear Solid 2, we had a Metal Gear Solid 2 that used, you know, tried to piggyback off Metal Gear Solid 1 in a very smart way, and it did so. Produced a fantastic game, one of the greatest games on PS2 for sure, and critically was better than Metal Gear Solid 3 anyway. But Metal Gear Solid 3, they did go for something different here. You know, first of all, you've got Big Boss anyway, and yes, okay, he's voiced by the same person. He looks very much like Solid Snake, but as we know, there's a very good reason for that. But I think they gave him enough of a different character that once you play a little bit as him and watch him in some of the cutscenes and listen to his dialogue, he's not Solid Snake. He's a much different character to his clone. So the environment was different, the style of gameplay was different. This was, for me, truly the most stealth-oriented game out of all of them because it included stealth in outdoor environments. So that opened up a whole different can of worms. I mean, we're talking, you know, going through the grass, climbing up trees, you know, hiding in little crevices here and there, being able to change your uniform to maximize your camo index. The camo index, I think, was one of the greatest additions to Metal Gear Solid. The fact that it gives you a visual representation of how well camouflaged you are, I think is genius, because for me as a player, I mean, I would always be striving to get that as high as I could. So, I mean, let's say I'd be lying in a patch of grass and I see that I'm at 75%, and I think to myself, maybe there's a way I can push this to 80. And I'd spend time kind of changing my outfits to see which one is going to give me the best camo for a particular section of the game. And they added variety to that, so there's suits that do different things. So you've got ones that, you know, if you choke someone, you gain stamina back. If you stamina kill Ocelot, you get one that stops gun sway. Some of them stop stamina reduction. Some of them give you 80% camo wherever you go. They absolutely nailed it for me with the camo stuff. That was, for me, that was some of the most enjoyable stuff about Metal Gear Solid 3. For me, that when you're outdoors, it's like the purest stealth, you know, being camouflaged. At the end of the day, when you look at out in the wild, how are you stealthy? You're stealthy by staying low and blending in with your surroundings, right? And so Metal Gear Solid 3 absolutely nailed it in that regard, if you ask me. What else? It had the whole idea of wild animals, obviously, because you're out there. Attention to detail. I mean, you've got your stamina gauge. Okay, you know, you could eat glowing mushrooms in order to charge your batteries, but I think we can forgive them for that. It's Metal Gear Solid. They do have some weird shit from time to time. But you've got poisonous animals, so sometimes you don't realise that you're standing in a particular spot and a scorpion will come and bite you, and you'll have to treat yourself, otherwise you're going to die. I mean, what a great little detail. You can capture that scorpion live and throw it in your enemy's face. You know, such wonderful innovations that weren't in previous games and didn't have to be in this game. I reckon if you couldn't capture scorpions or spiders and throw them at someone's face, no one would have realised and said, oh, why didn't they have this in this game? It's such a big mistake. But they put it in there because they're geniuses, that's why. So that was very smart, I think. What else in terms of gameplay? I mean, I guess I can include, you know, the boss battles into the gameplay. They were nicely done. The Cobra unit was a very wise decision, and you know, yes, they're reminiscent slightly of Dead Cell in the way that, you know, they operate, but their abilities are nicely. They have a nice variety. I mean, let's think about their abilities. The Pain is able to control bees and form an armor with them. You've got the Fear, who has stealth. You've got the End with his amazing, you know, ability to blend into nature and his wonderful sniping skills. You've got the Sorrow, who is a boss who doesn't have a health bar. Have you ever seen a boss without a health bar before? The fact that you have to use the fake death pill or you know, and the revival pill. Again, genius strokes. Who else? Fighting the young Ocelot obviously is fun as well. You know, the young cocky Ocelot. The boss herself. You know, the boss. Don't get me started on the boss. The boss is, I think, probably, not only in terms of story is she the most important character anyway. I mean, when you've played through all the Metal Gears, you understand that the entire Metal Gear Solid axis revolves around the boss and her will. That, you know, she's a pivotal character. But in terms of the way she was implemented in Metal Gear Solid 3, the way she constantly comes up on you from time to time, she completely destroys Snake on multiple occasions, so you fear her as an opponent, because you're used to Big Boss being this, you know, you think, okay, he's the father of Solid Snake, you know, he's the greatest soldier that ever lived, they made clones of this guy, he's so good. And then you see the boss absolutely destroy him on multiple occasions, and your kind of sense of awe of Big Boss is shattered, because you're like, whoa, this woman is just a whole nother level. And the fact that the whole game builds up to a boss battle in which you have to defeat her is absolutely genius, you know. And the fact that, you know, in the earlier bits that she could kill you at any time, she has the ability to do that, but she doesn't. And then you learn of the story of her sacrifice, etc. The boss makes her one of the most wonderfully kind of molded characters in Metal Gear Solid history, and adds, you know, a definite plus point to the boss battles as well. I mean, who can forget the boss battle that you have with her, where you primarily have to use CQC? And bringing it back round to CQC is very wise, because throughout the game you see her using CQC in a superior way to Snake, and using it to disarm him, to break his arm, to take him down, etc. And the fact that you use her own trick against her primarily to beat her, obviously unless, you know, you get a machine gun and mow her down, but that's not really the aim of that boss battle. Again, it's a nice kind of way to bring it back round again. So that environment, you know, with the white flowers and everything, is just, it's so memorable, and it created such a wonderful atmosphere that I think is one of the most well done pieces of Metal Gear around. You know, you've got everything from that to the Vulcan boss battle in much closer quarters with his annoying attacks and his never-ending ability to bounce back. Even in Metal Gear Solid 5, the bastard won't die, so he was a pretty crazy character. And then it comes to, for me, the boss battle that I enjoyed most in Metal Gear Solid history, which is the End. Why did I enjoy my battle against the End? Well, if you've seen me play Metal Gear Solid before, you will know that I love snipers. if I was, I've said it many times, if I was ever forced into being in the military, I'd probably want to be a sniper. And the fact that you have a sniper battle against the end is such an epic battle. I mean, the first time through, it's going to take you a long time. He's going to outsnipe you. He's going to take you down. If you take too long, or if you stay in the same spot for too long, he's going to creep up on you, and you get thrown into the jail cell, and you have to make your way back. He takes mercy on you, which is pretty cool. I remember trying to figure out how to defeat him, talking to people on the codec endlessly, trying to understand how I can do things better. The fact that you can forward your system clock on the PS2 or PS3 or whatever you're using, and if you forward it far enough, he dies of old age, is genius. The fact that if you're alert enough, you can see that after a cutscene, when he's in a wheelchair, he has a life bar when you resume the game, and you get like a 10-second window to shoot him and kill him, so you don't have a boss battle at all. Again, is genius. Just the way that boss battle plays out, and the experience of trying to get one up on this legendary sniper, for me it was like the pinnacle of boss battles, and I just love that challenge. And I think to this day is still my favourite boss battle of any game that I've ever played. The end was a really special moment for me in terms of Metal Gear Solid boss battles. So what else? Metal Gear Solid 3, I think, had one of the best stories of all the Metal Gear Solids. Why? Because it was the least convoluted of all the stories. It still had a bit of double crossing, triple crossing, etc. But when you compare it to Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 4, it was a cakewalk. You had the whole, you had the love story between Snake and Eva, and I think that played out in a wonderful way. I mean, I loved Eva as a character. She was such a badass, seriously. Of course, she comes in, with the whole, the sexiness and the boobs and all that kind of stuff. But I felt like she was just like a perfect kind of love interest for Big Boss. Just in terms of her character, I felt like she complemented Big Boss so well. And the scenes that you had between them, there was like a tangible, you could feel the chemistry between them. But Big Boss, he's got a job to do. He still can't trust her fully, etc. She wants to gain his trust, and the way, the little intricacies of how that plays out, the to and fro between the two of them, and the way events play out eventually, I thought was really strong. I mean, if we're talking about intricacy and we're talking about love story, I guess we have to consider the fact that there's another layer. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not just Snake and Eva. What we have in the story is a love triangle between Snake, Eva, and the boss. Because obviously we know that Snake has strong feelings for the boss. On the one hand, she's his mentor. That she's taught him everything that she knows. So there's like a maternal thing going on. But Snake, I think, has conflicting feelings for her. That I think Snake was in love with her. But on the one hand, he knows that their fates are never going to come together in that way. And well, through the events of the game, we know that she is going to be his enemy, and that Snake is going to have to kill her at some point. So we have, when we throw Eva into that mix, it creates a very interesting love triangle between the three of them, and I think that's a love triangle that's unparalleled, in the rest of the series, because I think, well, we have a love triangle in Metal Gear Solid 4. You've got Johnny, who's in love with Meryl, and Meryl, who at the start seems to still love Snake, but then as the story goes on, she kind of realizes that Snake is a man on a totally different mission. He has no time for love. He's got different goals in life, and she convinces herself that Snake isn't the man that she fell in love with. So while that's also a love triangle, I think the triangle that we have in Metal Gear Solid 3 is in relative terms stronger than the one in Metal Gear Solid 4, I would say. So yeah, when we return to Eva in Metal Gear Solid 3, the payoff at the end with the revelation that she was actually a spy, and the way she reveals the truth about the boss, she was voice acted really well, and I loved Eva, and Eva and Snake were just a fantastic combination. As good as Meryl and Solid Snake, that's debatable, but personally, because I like Big Boss more than Solid Snake, and I like Eva more than Meryl, by default that makes them my favourite pair. But I can definitely understand people who love Snake and Meryl, because their story in Metal Gear Solid 1 is also pretty cool. So yeah, I mean, you've got that. again, you've got wonderful, memorable cutscenes, and even some more light-hearted moments in there as well. You know, Ocelot's character for me was fantastic because, on the one hand, you know, when we first see him, we fear him to some extent because of his skills. You know, the kid has skills, but the way Big Boss deals with him, you know, we beat him very early on in the boss battle. You have the cutscene where he completely destroys Ocelot, and you have the very famous "You're pretty good," all of that stuff. You get the sense that Ocelot, he's on a different side to Snake in terms of, you know, the story. That's how we perceive it when we're playing through. But at the same time, you can sense his admiration for Snake, and you know, his little quirks, his character, his hand movements, his childishness, his immaturity at times. I just loved it, seriously. He was just like a pesky kid, but at the same time he was very dangerous, so he was a very interesting character. And that's why it disappointed me so much in Metal Gear Solid 5 when Ocelot turned into this 40-year-old grump that had almost nothing interesting about him, you know.
Snake, have you seen Earth versus the Spider?
Nope.
It's about this spider that suddenly mutates into a giant monster. They bring it into the city in a state of hibernation, but it wakes up and starts wrecking the place.
So why did the spider turn huge?
I told you, it suddenly mutated.
Yeah, right.
Snake, what are you doing?
I'm in a box.
A cardboard box? Why are you...
I don't know, I was just looking at it, and suddenly I got this irresistible urge to get inside. No, not just an urge. More than that. It was my destiny to be here, in the box.
Destiny?
The codec calls. I think it probably had the best codec calls of any Metal Gear Solid, in the sense that I remember Paramedic, where every time you saved the game she'd discuss a movie with you. I thought that was a great idea to have someone who's a movie buff, because we all know Kojima's a movie man. I think that was a great idea. The fact that you could wear different suits, well, I call them suits, but costumes, outfits, what are they called? Uniforms, whatever, and you could call them up on the codec, and most of them would have a different codec call in reaction to what they're seeing. So you could put on like the zombie face paint, and then call them up and they'd say something different. So I'd love that. Major Zero turned out to be the Zero later on, but during the story I loved hearing that kind of English Major, you know, the poshness of Zero. I did love the codec calls in Metal Gear Solid 3. They had a nice character to it. Of course, you know, there is going to be a bias towards Metal Gear Solid 3 because I have played it the most out of all of the Metal Gears as well. I've had the most repeat attempts. I've completed on European Extreme, so you know, I've spent a lot of time on Metal Gear Solid 3. But it's the Metal Gear Solid game that I always feel like I want to go back to. And if, let's say, 10 years go by and I never play a Metal Gear Solid, and I have to say to myself, I only have time to play one, which would I have to choose? It would be Metal Gear Solid 3 every time. No contest, because for me it has it all, you know, both in terms of story and, you know, the gameplay and the memorable stuff in it. It's always the Metal Gear Solid that I want to return to most. And, you know, even right now I could sit down and play through that game and I would still love it just as much as I did the first time. So yeah, I think it's been very long, but it's always something that I wanted to do, you know, for those who are willing to listen to my ramblings about the Metal Gear Solids. This was always something that I wanted to do, because now that I've completed what may be the final Metal Gear Solid that we get from Kojima, I'm kind of feeling a little bit sad and a bit empty at the fact that we may never see, you know, another Metal Gear Solid game from him ever again. And, you know, and if there is another Metal Gear Solid game, maybe it's going to be produced by Konami, you know, made by Konami, and it's just not going to be the same again. So yeah, I have a little bit of emptiness in that regard, so maybe this is my way of just having a final kind of say about Metal Gear Solid before I leave it for quite some time, because you may never see it on the channel again. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Those are my Metal Gear Solids in order. So let's recap. Peace Walker, Metal Gear Solid 5, Metal Gear Solid 4, Metal Gear Solid 2, Metal Gear Solid 1, and Metal Gear Solid 3 at the top of the chain. Obviously, you know, okay, this video is a very long video, but I could dedicate one video each to each of these games that would last the same amount of time. I mean, I could talk for an hour about Metal Gear Solid 3, or any of the other Metal Gear Solids. Maybe not Peace Walker, but the other ones definitely I could. So this was just me kind of saying the first stuff that came to mind, because the notes that I took while I was at work, it was all kind of fairly bullet pointed, and I haven't really added to them. I've just let myself flow freely, so this isn't really much of a kind of scripted analysis or anything like that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this little discussion, but one of the main purposes of making this is I wanted to hear what everyone else had to say as well. You know, I want to hear about what your favorite moments of Metal Gear are. I want you guys to rank your experiences in order. Was there anything that you particularly agreed with, anything that you really disagreed with? If so, why? Try to keep it clean, otherwise I'll delete your comment, because this is just casual Metal Gear Solid discussion. This isn't meant to be some kind of serious debate or anything like that. And even if it is, I hate people that just, you know, that resort to cheap abuse or anything like that when discussing stuff like this. So I doubt anything like that's going to happen, but I would love to hear your thoughts on Metal Gear, because it may be some time before we get to, if ever, kind of have a video where we talk about a brand new Metal Gear. So having reached the end of the Metal Gear Solid saga and pretty much gotten what we're going to get, these are my thoughts, and I would like to thank you guys for listening. Hopefully, maybe one day we'll meet with a new Metal Gear Solid game, and maybe, just maybe, it will remind us of why we love this franchise so much. Until then, I will say bye-bye, and I will probably see you guys in the comments for some extended discussion about what you guys have heard in this video. Take care. Thanks for watching. See you soon.